Hi everyone, and welcome back. Today we'll be looking into Chapter 9, Conflict in Relationships. Conflict is something none of us can completely avoid, but how we understand it and manage it makes it all the difference. By the end of this session, hopefully you'll understand what conflict is, how our emotions and power play into it, and strategies you can use to help handle conflict in a healthy, hopefully constructive way. Now let's start with the distinction here. This is where many get confused, but what's the difference between a disagreement and a conflict? Now, a disagreement is simply having different opinions. You and a friend might disagree about your favorite movie or what restaurant to go to, but you can usually disagree to agree or agree to disagree. Conflict, on the other hand, is a little bit deeper. Conflict usually involves hostility. It involves emotions in the sense that your goals or your values are incompatible. Instead of just having a different opinion, you feel like the other person is standing in the way of something you need or you want. That's when it becomes relational. Now, the big part here that I like to tell students is that when it gets you a very emotional response, that's when you've moved from disagreement to maybe a conflict. Now, how are arguments related to conflict? Some people see conflict as a negative and destructive. From this perspective, conflict really disrupts the normal flow of things and should be avoided whenever possible. So there are different tolerances here that I like to share. So the tolerance for a disagreement or a conflict is the degree that an individual can openly discuss differing opinions without feeling personally attacked or confronted. There are people with a high tolerance for a disagreement where their high tolerance, they can easily discuss things that are different of their opinion or different arguments, and they kind of operate as normal. There are others who have a very low tolerance for disagreement, where anytime there's a disagreement, they feel personally attacked and devalued. And that's where it can definitely lead to conflict. And knowing that there are different types of people that have high or low tolerance will really help with understanding conflict. Now, conflict is viewed by two different ways in our textbook. It's a lot of information, sorry. So there's two different perspectives. Is that the first one, it's perfectly normal workings of a system and should definitely be avoided. They say that it's negative, it's destructive, and that they are very different from disagreements. So our textbook goes into that a little bit more. But the other part of our textbook talks about the second part is that it's normal. That having a conflict and managing and overcoming that conflict is foundational building block of relationships. Conflict helps relationships become healthier, maybe stronger, and it's neither good or bad. So obviously this can change throughout relationships, so it definitely depends on if you're platonic. If you remember those 6 styles of love that we talked about in Chapter 8, it definitely matters on what type of relationship we're talking about here. Is that person a high tolerance or low tolerance? How will this impact your interpersonal communication? So conflict here becomes interpersonal when there's interdependence. All right, so basically, so it's at the end here, meaning that people involved matter to each other. Your actions affect one another. You don't really have interpersonal conflict with strangers. Do you know why? You're just able to walk away. If you're arguing with someone in Walmart, you can just walk away from that situation. But with friends and family, coworkers, maybe even, significant others, avoiding isn't always an option. And that's why how we handle conflict matters greatly. So sometimes you really have to figure out the conflicts. So there are costs of unresolved conflict. So here we'll look at the costs, and then we'll look at how to overcome this and how to have a good, healthy conflict situation. Now, when conflict is ignored or mismanaged, can you agree that it really damages relationships? It does. Maybe you're thinking of a few right now, like, oh, they had a conflict and now they no longer talk. So conflict affects things like a decreased liking, a less care about the relationship with someone, Maybe you're thinking about ending that relationship. We talk about the differences there. Relational apathy, or even worse, if maybe you've seen this in movies, you've seen revenge seeking or even aggressiveness. So basically, if there's a conflict unresolved, it tends to make things worse and not better. So conflict reaches a point where it can't be avoided and it needs to be addressed. So oftentimes, conflict here, this is something that was huge in the 90s. It was a big debate in the show Friends about the conflict between the two people here, Ross and Rachel. If this is something you're not familiar with, definitely talk with someone a little older who might have seen or heard of the show, and they'll be able to explain this kind of unresolved conflict and how it impacted their relationships. Obviously, we don't have time to watch it here, but it is something I normally do in class to help you see how conflict can impact relationships. Now, often conflict comes from incompatible goals. People either want different things or they want the same thing, but disagree on how to accomplish that thing. And the big part here that's very important is that your emotions also play a big role. Emotions are our physiological reactions, our heart rate, our brain activity, body changes, while feelings are the way we interpret and label those emotions. So people are unaware of their emotional states, have difficulty communicating them. So having an emotional awareness is understanding that, emotions are part of conflict. If you see someone getting mad and you see, oh, maybe I shouldn't, antagonize this person. So managing emotions. So this is what EQ is if you see it in our textbook. This is emotional intelligence. Managing emotions is key to de-escalating conflict. The better we are at emotional awareness or emotional intelligence here, being able to name what we're feeling and why, the better we communicate that without blowing up or shutting down. So there are different stages here for distinct emotional processes: is perceiving emotions, understanding those emotions, managing your emotions, and even using emotions. So our textbook, again, it goes into a lot more detail. There's some quizzes and things you can do to see your emotional intelligence about things. We'll talk about that more in the assignment, but this is a good idea of how do you let go of negative emotions? How do you make sure it doesn't impact the relationship? So a big part here that we're going to look at is managing conflict. So with managing conflict, here we go. The first one is to stay calm. Now I pause because it's almost funny to say something like that. Are you ever in a moment where you're feeling really mad? Like maybe you just came onto campus and someone took your parking spot. Are you able to stay calm? Probably not. So staying calm is figuring out what works best for you, doing some deep breathing, trying to disassociate, things like that. There's other ones is avoid blaming someone and name calling people. If you blame someone immediately in a conflict, what do you think is going to happen? They're going to get defensive. So you don't want to blame someone or name call someone, which is why we'll kind of look at you statements here in a moment. I think I skipped past that. But you don't want to blame. So that means when you're in a situation and you say, well, you statements, you never listen, or you're so selfish, those come across as a moral judgment. And it almost makes the other person very defensive. So when you're in a conflictive situation, you shift to things like I situations. Talk about, well, I feel unheard. I feel. So that way you're targeting more yourself. You're avoiding that blame and the name calling. Now, these are just advice. Again, it's not perfect for every situation. Another one is talk it through, open and share your different perspectives. A lot of times with conflict there's a lot of miscommunication. We're thinking we understand it one way and it's completely something else. So paraphrase each other. If you're ever doing like you call someone and they're upset, you talk it through, you share and you paraphrase what they're saying. Sometimes maybe it's way too intense. I've had to do this with students in a classroom is I have to become a mediator. You need someone to help balance that dual perspective because opening up about both can be kind of a struggle. And then the other one here, this is kind of funny, but one conflict at a time, which means don't have something that happened 7 years ago throw into the conversation. You want to work on what's happening now. That way you can work on that solution together. Now, this was the advice from our textbook. Hopefully that helps a little bit. There is a little more strategies you can use to de-escalate conflict, and understanding that high tolerance and that low tolerance will help dramatically. So here, there's a few different strategies. And then this would be like some avoiders back away from conflict completely. They're like, ooh, I don't want to do this. Battlers go head to head. They often want to be more aggressive. Like, we're going to attack this now. So the ABCs, there's avoiders who don't want to do it. The battlers who are just going to attack head on. And then the last one is collaborators who, on the other hand, want that win-win situation. They want to make sure you both win. And that can take out some time too. But the style of the way you do this will depend on the relationships and the people you're talking to and how you adapt to find better resolutions. What I find that helps is the STLC conflict model. This is something I have to do a lot with my kids, or I have to do a lot in class if people are getting upset, is we do the stop, physically, mentally take time to stop and breathe, think about what you're doing. So you're stopping, you're thinking about the conflict, you're listening to the other person's side, which is often the most difficult. We had a whole chapter on listening, and it's a struggle. And then, of course, communicate with using the I statements rather than you, and you're communicating, you're helping each other. This sounds simple, but the STLC has honestly solved so many conflicts inside the classroom that I had to share this, at least on a slide. So to wrap up, conflict is inevitable, but doesn't have to destroy relationships. In fact, when you handle it well, it can actually strengthen your relationships. So it kind of depends there on both sides. The keys are emotional awareness, avoiding that defensive you statements, staying calm, and trying to use strategies like that STLC model. Honestly, it probably might help. And then as you reflect this week, I want you to think about your conflict style. Are you the ABC? Are you, more avoiding? Are you a battler? Are you a collaborator? And then think about your style. Practice some strategies. Do you think it would help? You kind of think back to a situation where maybe something went wrong. What could have helped that situation come about a little bit differently? So one thing we learn with humans is we're never perfect. We're always learning, and that's part of communication, is just understanding each other and learning how to be a better communicator.